everyone, hope you're doing alright. Yes, so welcome to the first video edition of the Improvised Music Agenda podcast. Sorry about the audio quality of the video, because it was recorded from the Zoom feed. But if you want to hear a high quality version, or high audio quality version of the podcast, you can follow the link, which will be below in the description, which will be to the podcast, so please do check it out. But yeah, so I guess this time, Brian Krock, yes, hope you enjoy. But before that, if you're liking this video, please do subscribe, and there's a Patreon link to the podcast below as well, so if you want to give some money, feel free. If not, no worries. Yeah, so I hope you enjoy the conversation with Brian. Start asking about the YouTube channel and kind of how you kind of got into that, because that's like in the last year or so you've been getting that up and running.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, man, I started the YouTube channel. For those of your listeners who don't know, it's called Score Study, and it's just a series of videos where I take it like a really deep dive into some of my favorite scores of all time. So yeah, I started the YouTube channel immediately after the pandemic hit the US, because I had been working. I was subbing on this Broadway show called The Book of Mormon in March, and we were all speculating what's going to go on, what's going to happen when the pandemic hits. We were all so stupid and naive because we had no idea the severity of it. And so we were working right up until the quarantine orders hit, and unfortunately I got sick. So I'm sure it was because I was just out every day, playing in a musical pit with I don't know how many other 10 or 11 other people. So so I was bedridden I got really sick, and it turned out to be coronavirus. And
wow.
then so I was bedridden for like a couple weeks, maybe almost 3 weeks actually, and I got just in this really dark, depressed zone, because I saw, I had a couple tours scheduled. I was supposed to be going to Japan and going to Europe, and then also I had just a bunch of other work here in town. All of it got canceled, and I was feeling just useless. I was just laying on the couch all day feeling ill, with my fiance taking care of me. And when I emerged from that period, I just realized, like, this is going to be really long and I need to do something rather than doing nothing. So I happen to be friends with a couple people who have had lots of success in their artistic careers because of their engagement with social media. And I've always sort of been I think too lax with the social media stuff. The sort of world that I am a part of here in Brooklyn is really about music first and foremost. And so a lot of my peers and I never really took, hustling on social media very seriously. But in particular, one of my good friends from college, it's this guy, Adam Neely, who has had like a profound level of success because of YouTube. So I asked him for advice, and I just decided, you know what, I'm gonna give this a try, and see if I sort of felt like I have something unique that isn't really on YouTube. I the funny thing is I also didn't ever watch YouTube until I got sick, and then I never was a YouTube person. I just pretty much read and listened to music and stuff. But when I was like sick on the couch for all day every day, I went into these deep YouTube holes, and I realized, like, this is pretty cool. Like I was looking at people like a couple channels that were big inspirations for me were like this guy H Bomber guy. His name's
Oh, okay.
Harrison something. He goes by H Bomber Guy, and he talks about video games. And I also really got into Philosophy Tube, which is a channel about philosophy. I got really into this French composer, and now I'm blanking on his name. But I realized that there's like really deep, serious scholarship happening on YouTube in
Definitely.
the form of these like long form essays, basically, like video essays, you know? And so I thought, you know, I could do something like this with music, like just do like really, really deep and good information and long form sort of things. So that, you know, I've just been trying it out. The tough thing is going to be keeping it going when my performing and composing career starts up again, because like all the gigs I had this year have been rescheduled for 2021.
Oh,
So
yeah.
it's looking, if unless things go really poorly here in the States, which you know, they definitely could, you know, it's going to be a busy year, and I want to keep making these videos, but dude, they take so much time to make.
Dude, that's
So,
the next thing I was going to ask you. Like, I mean, the editing must be the laborious thing. I'm just
yeah, dude,
amazed. You kind of, there's one every other week. It's like, fuck, this guy's like on the case. It's just,
I fell in love with editing, man. I really did. But also, you know, I have a lot of anxiety, and in the way I have always sort of tended to deal with it is through like um, getting lost in work. You know, it might not be the healthiest thing, but so you know, it's been a way of like combating anxiety for me, just getting sort of, it's such a repetitive sort of menial task, video editing, you know, you're
mm,
just sitting at your computer like
yeah.
you know, for 8 hours in a row or whatever. I sort of dig that stuff because I just like, you lose track of time. It's really like detail oriented, and it just sort of, I just fell in love with it. It sort of jives with who I am as a person. I like doing that kind of stuff. So now like what I'm thinking about is like, you know, and another unintended consequence of learning video editing is that I now do that for the Brooklyn Conservatory of Music, which is in my neighborhood.
Oh, wow.
They hired me to do their video editing. So that's been a cool like new side hustle or whatever. But now like what I'm trying to think of is like, how can I use the new parameters and set of skills that I've acquired from video editing and use them as inspiration in my writing? Because I've it's just sort of like started thinking differently about form uh, and you know, all the different parameters that are available to you inside of a video editing software, which are you know, very different from music notation software or digital audio workstations.
Mm,
So I've been thinking a lot recently about how I could use these new like skills in my music. I'm not sure though, you know, I'm
yeah.
just sort of brainstorming right now.
Oh, great. Cool. But, yeah, but dude, I love how like varied it is as well. Like the channel, like, yeah, but I just love the idea that Stairway to Heaven, the recorder bits are in there as well as like Braxton. It's like, it's kind of,
Yeah, dude. I
I feel
just
like it's made for
decided.
me, you know?
Thanks, man. Yeah, a lot of people say that, and I think like what the, you know, it's like one thing that's tough about like becoming a musician, or sort of like deciding that you're gonna pursue music professionally, is that at every juncture, uh, outside stimuli are encouraging you to specialize, to sort of brand yourself as one thing. And I think what I'm finding is that like we're all so many different things. Like, and there's no reason I'm like done being embarrassed about my influences. Like, you know, I don't. There's no reason why I can't love Braxton or Ornette Coleman or Charlie Parker, and also love, like uh, Led Zeppelin or Dream Theater for that matter, or Metallica or whatever. I still, all of that music um, is important to me. It might not be as it might confuse people, when they stumble on my channel, because from one video to the next, I'm talking about film scores, and then I'm talking about technical death metal,
Yeah.
then I'm talking about like avant-garde improvised music, or but to me they all are special. They all excite me, and so yeah, I'm just sort of like, I'm done trying to be one thing. I've just had so many people in the industry, especially, tell me like, you know, what are you? Are you a big band composer? Are you a saxophone player? Are you a woodwind doubler? Like what, it's like people really need to categorize and really need to like pigeonhole in order. I mean, it's a function of understanding so much information that you just sort of like, the human brain just immediately compartmentalizes and puts things in boxes.
Yeah, man. So true.
You
So
know,
yeah, definitely. I found that it's weird. Like even like listening to, I don't know, like I was like last year, like got into like bit of like Gorguts or something, like, and how that has the same feeling as listening to, I don't know, like some string quartet by Bartok, or it's like
yeah,
super
there's so
similar
much
vibe.
there's so much prejudice that we have that we don't even acknowledge. Like what, like the guys in Gorguts are absolute geniuses, man. They're doing something, that's completely true to their artistic integrity. They're doing it at the highest level, and yet they're never going to be like, you know, I'm sure they're happy with their world and their success, but or another guy I always think of is Devin Townsend or Steven Wilson. These sort of prog rock guys
Yeah.
of the modern day. Um, or there's just so many great artists that because they're in a genre that we don't consider like highfalutin, like jazz or classical music, but there's absolutely nothing uh, that's present in the music that makes it less valuable. And if there's one thing that's important to me, especially as I get older, and I'm sure you can relate to this, it's not like falling asleep. I don't want to. I want to always be searching for new things and always have an open mind,
Mm.
and look for what you can learn from anything. So yeah, and then it always happens to be shit like Gorguts that gives me some idea that I would never have found, if I was just listening to Paul Desmond or something. I mean, that's oversimplifying it, but
Yeah, for sure
you,
though. Yeah.
it's just such a ripe, fecund world, and there's so much great stuff. So why ignore it? The only reason I can think of to ignore it is that there's so much information that you could sort of end up becoming a what's the word? Uh, you know, you need to focus on one thing if you want to go as deep as you can go in that thing.
That's true. Yeah, because no, definitely with that's a good point. Yeah, because I found myself kind of like trying to like go to all these weird musical worlds and not really kind of diving too deep in each one.
Yeah, I mean, like I'm just reading this book right now where Nietzsche, Friedrich Nietzsche, like says he thinks Wagner is uh, I can't remember the word he uses, but it's so good because Wagner's into theater, he's into writing, he's into philosophy. He's like a philanderer in a bunch of different things, and so he'll never achieve like his greatness that he could in the music. And it's just so funny to read that in retrospect,
Yeah.
because of course, all those diverse things are in the music too. It's not like there's separate worlds that you can cordon off. So
No, definitely. No, it all feeds in, doesn't it? It's yeah, but definitely at the moment now, I feel like I'm trying to catch up with a lot of listening that I missed out when I was a teenager. Like it's weird
me
because
too, man.
yeah, but
Me
you know
too.
when you're younger, you're in like some sort of like tunnel vision kind of thing, and
Yeah, I
you
used to
missed out
talk
the other
about
things.
this. Sorry to cut you off, man. I just you just reminded me of these stupid conversations I used to have when I was a kid with my best friends. Like, I didn't even want to listen to music if there wasn't a saxophone in it, you know? Like, I was bored by like Keith Jarrett Trio because I'm a saxophone player. I want to listen to the saxophone, you know? I was just like so
Yeah.
narrow-minded. It's
Oh man.
stupid.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
yeah, it's funny though, isn't it? Like, cause I found that with like Radiohead, like, cause when I was a teenager, I just assumed like, oh yeah, Radiohead, they're like depressing, aren't they? And then listen to it, like, you know, just got like OK Computer on CD, and I was like, what the fuck? How did I miss this out?
Yeah.
Then I was just hearing everything as music pre-Radiohead and post-Radiohead, and it was like, oh god, this everything makes a bit more sense now.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, but so yeah, I'm just thinking with yeah, 'cause the question I like to ask a lot of the guests is, so when you were kind of getting serious about music and listening, so what was in your musical diet back then?
Hmm. Well, it's funny because I just the other day listened to your interview with Jim Black, and he was talking about sort of how strange it is for him to hear all these people who are like rock gods today who were listening to him growing up, like, and it just made me think like, everybody my generation was obsessed with Human Feel, like
Yeah,
his band with Kurt and Chris Speed and uh, and Andrew D'Angelo. Andrew D'Angelo is a huge influence on me because I saw him play when I was in college. He came he came through town with Matt Wilson,
oh wow,
uh, and that was in Champaign, Urbana, Illinois, which is like a farm town in the middle of nowhere. I have no idea why they were there, but seeing Andrew play, I just had never heard anybody like, I just never heard anything close to that. That one show, like hearing Andrew play when I was maybe a freshman in college, really affected me. And but I've also been a person who goes through strong phases. So like I think the first time in my life where I like really got obsessed with music of any kind was when I fell in love with progressive rock when I was in middle school. And then I became one of those kids who just like sat in the basement and with their John Petrucci DVD
yeah,
and just played chromatic scales in every possible permutation as fast as I could
amazing.
for, I couldn't wait to get home and just shred all day long. I was just like into sweep picking and economy picking and it was all about just like technique and technical facility that I was obsessed with that for a long time.
Oh wow. So was it guitar you started on, or was that kind of happening same time as you were getting to the saxophone?
I started on piano. I didn't have a lot of success on piano. I have a twin brother who is who was like a child prodigy. He's not a musician anymore, but or he's still a musician, but he doesn't do it professionally. And so we both started piano simultaneously, and he just had like immediately understood it and could play anything by ear. And like our teacher, we had this like local teacher who was like, he's a really special talent. You need to get him to a better teacher. Meanwhile, I was just like normal. But my brother was my only point of reference. So I was convinced that I sucked. So I never wanted to do that because I thought I sucked at it. So then I picked up the guitar, and that was my thing. Saxophone came later, and it got to a point where, my guitar teacher was this really cool guy. His name's Jim Consbrook, who's a teacher in the Chicago area. And he was teaching me about like Bach lute suites and Villalobos.
Wow.
And like, Argentinian tango, and like, he was teaching me about all that stuff. But then he was also teaching me about Dimebag Darrell and, Eddie Van Halen and Randy Rhoads, and like so I actually started going to 2 lessons in a row with him, so that we could do like one classical guitar lesson, and then the metal stuff was like for fun afterwards. But eventually, like he told me, like, you got to pick one, either saxophone or guitar. And in retrospect, I'm really happy we had that conversation, because I know it was a hard conversation for him, because basically he was like, there aren't that many opportunities that I'm aware of to have a career playing classical guitar. So I wouldn't recommend pursuing it in school. And he like sat down with me and my dad, and we had this whole conversation. So I was like, all right, if I can't do guitar, I'll do saxophone. I just was never going to be anything other than music. I just wasn't sure what instrument it would be. And the thing was, I wasn't that good at saxophone. Like I never like did like all stage or like anything like that. And I grew up in Chicago, where there were just like so many sick saxophone players my age. So I was like, I always sort of just thought I wasn't that good at saxophone. Because you compare yourself to your peers. And but then I went to college for jazz saxophone, and then in college I really fell in love with classical composing, because my parents live in Chicago, and I was going to school like 3 hours south in Champaign-Urbana. So I wouldn't go home during the summer. I would just stay in my apartment and work and stuff. So over the summer, I decided to take private lessons with this guy named Reynold Tharp, and he was like a classical composer. He is a great classical composer. He introduced me to Ligeti. I wrote my first string quartet under his guidance. He introduced me to Do To You, and had me do counterpoint exercises from Fuchs and stuff. Like, he was an amazing teacher. So then I at that point I had another like crisis between composing and playing, because I just fell in love with composing. And I actually remember, man, like I had this one like really melodramatic moment where I like remember like crying about how like insufficient my composing was. Like I wrote some piece and I just was like, this sucks, and I worked on it so hard, and I just realized at that moment like that I would never be as good as I wanted to be unless I focused on that. So then through a turn of events, like I heard about Jim McNeely, who became like my mentor when I went to masters, and then afterwards, have kept in touch with him. And he was sort of a similar type of person, I think. He went to the same school, the University of Illinois in Champaign-Urbana. He had a lot of different interests, and it took him a long time to graduate because he was, he was working a lot. And so I think, his background resonated with me. and then obviously his music resonated with me. And so then I decided to focus on composing. And this is a very long answer to your question.
That's
man.
all right. That's
But,
good. I'm happy with it, man. Yeah, it's good. Carry on.
but you know, basically, like, I decided to focus on composing. But then when I moved out to New York, I just realized like nobody was going to play my music unless I played my music. You know.
Mm.
So that's why I still play. I always feel torn between the things because, like, you know, there's just not that much time in the day to do everything, you know. But I've found sort of this balance where, you know, I write music that tends to be like a stretch for me as a player, and then I have to tackle it and I get better as a player, you know. So, and then, you know, through you know, the opportunities I have to play, you know, I'm learning more and more things about the instruments I play, and I incorporate that into my music, and it sort of just all feeds into this one thing. You know, I sort of like have I also have always been into artists who do whatever the fuck they want, basically, you know.
Yeah.
And like John Zorn is an example, Steve
Dude.
Coleman is an example. There's just so many examples, and so it doesn't seem strange to me to like jump between things. You know, it's because I've just seen it from afar from so many masterful people, you know.
Totally. I mean, yeah, the whole thing with Zone as well. Like that was a big influence for me, or still is, always. But yeah,
Yeah,
it's just one of those things. I wish I had better organizing power, you know, because
yeah,
you
exactly.
know all these things in the notebook that you want to try out. It's like, oh yeah, cool. Like this band with like this thing, and then that string trio, or whatever. But then it's like, oh god, it's like
Yeah,
some
man.
weird fantasy, and it's like, oh god, how much work does that take to do that? I mean,
Dude,
you know, just the whole idea of making a record as well, like that wipes me out for like 2 to 4 years. Just so much
dude,
energy, and then
me too, man. After I made my first big band record, I was like, I'm never doing this again. It was like, it was traumatic, man. I had PTSD. I was like, it was so much stress, and also a financial disaster.
oh god, yeah.
But but we don't need to talk about that. Yeah, every time I make a record, I just did a recording last week of some new music with my quartet, and I go through this same. My fiance was like talking me off a ledge because after the recording, I was like, I suck. This music is garbage. I need to practice more. Like I just was so dark about it
Oh
afterwards.
man.
And my fiance is going like, you do this after every recording. And then, so I decided to take a week and not listen to it. And then earlier today, I finally opened up the session and was just skimming through it. I was like, oh, this sounds good. Yeah. All right,
Cool.
cool. You
Yeah.
know, like it's always way better than I remember it, you know? So.
No, totally. Yeah. I definitely get that. Like listening back, you just like get so excited. Like, wow, we're into a recording studio. Wow, look what we made. Wow.
Yeah,
But,
man. I mean, it's like everything is a dichotomy because to me, there's nothing better than making records.
oh,
Like,
dude, it's the best, isn't it? Yeah.
you know, but it's like it's so draining in every way. And you know, and it's not it's, you know, like, I mean, this goes back to YouTube. Like, I'm really trying to figure out, as everyone is, like, how to continue making records, but get them listened to by more people, you know, like
Mm.
to make them more of a viable thing. You know, like I was one of those people, as I'm sure you were, who grew up preferring to buy those records that nobody knew about.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, you can probably like
But
see a load behind me there. Yeah.
yeah, but then you get older and you realize, like, you know, to take an example, the band I love, although I still don't know how to pronounce their name, I don't think anybody does, Necrophagist. Um, you know, they only made 2 records, and then Muhammad, uh, the lead singer and songwriter and guitar player, now works for like uh, BMW or something. He's just got like
Wow.
a sales job or whatever. And you realize like there's nothing good about being the making the records that nobody's heard of.
Yeah.
It's like it might be cool to like people, to like niche fans, but those people aren't going to help you survive. So like we've got these tools with the internet to connect with people around the world, and I'm like trying to figure out how can I find those niche people but everywhere, you know, so that it can become more sustainable for me to make these epic projects, because you know, I want to keep doing it forever. So, you know.
Totally. I guess, yeah, I guess it's all, it feels like it's changing now again, isn't it? I mean, or even because I guess like we've all got the tools now to kind of do a lot of things ourselves, like especially in the last year or so, and be able to release things more often. But yeah, it's just making me think like, you know, I wonder if it's kind of got to go back to the vibe it was in like, I don't know, 40s, 50s, and 60s, where people would just get into the studio, make a record, and you know, all the old musicians, I don't know, they would put like 3-4 albums out a year or something, weren't they? Like, you know.
Right. I mean, yeah, man, like I've been really inspired this year by Tim Byrne, like his productivity.
Oh yeah,
And he's
yeah.
just putting out like one of the best records of the year is an iPhone recording that my friend Simon German took.
Oh yeah, is that the Broken Shadows one?
Yeah.
Oh
And
yeah,
he
well,
sent
that's
that to
killer.
Tim, and then Tim had Dave Torn like make it sound good basically. And he's put out so many records this year, dude. And you know, last year I went on tour with Ethan Iverson for a couple months, and we had this conversation over the course of those 2 months, because he was saying like there you can put out too many records, and he was using Anthony Braxton as an example, or Sun Ra, you know, these people who just have hundreds and hundreds of records. It actually makes it problematic in a certain sense to understand their career, because there's so much to go through, you never will. And in a way it can be useful to use your records as something like signposts along your journey, to document like this is the era, this record is like what I was doing in 2019 and 2020. But if you're putting out 8 records a year or whatever,
Yeah.
you well, so I mean, but I hope it's clear that I don't know which way is better or worse. I feel like putting out a high volume of records creates more revenue streams, which allows you to make more records. But then again, when you release new records, there'll be less of a special occasion. So you might, you know, it's hard to say which is better.
Yeah, cause yeah, I find that, yeah, I agree with that. It's like, it's like, you know, it's kind of a big climax where it gets to like a new album coming out.
Yeah.
And that feeling's great, you know, then,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and that kind of, it's almost like a thing that, oh, here's what I've been locking myself away, working on, and this is it. But,
right.
But then again, I always think with the whole, especially, you know, people who are more in the improvised music scene, especially here, because, you know, it's like a document of a day, and how they're just like putting things out there, and, you know, and just kind of,
yeah,
which I think is pretty cool as well. So you can kind of like, I don't know, it's almost like a bit of history happening in real time, and you could just see like, oh yeah, wow, that's what that person sounded like back in March, and then September or something, you know, be like, oh cool, that this thing's crept into how their aesthetic kind of thing, you know, which it's quite cool in a way. I don't know, but you sometimes get that with you hear a development, I guess. I guess, yeah, you sort of hear that with the older recordings, you know.
I guess it depends, because like if you at least for the world of jazz, excuse me, if you get in the habit of just recording everything, then there's a thing that happens when you press the record button and you're in the studio, where people are very cognizant of every moment, and it becomes harder to find that flow where you're just not worried and you're just sort of like tapped into who you're playing with. That is hard to find in the studio. I guess it's probably easier for like the masters to tap into that when they're in the studio, because like you said, they were in the studio so often.
Yeah.
But I guess if you just get in the habit of always recording everything, then when you have those magical moments, like that Broken Shadows record, you just put it out, because there it was. It you know, and I think a good clue is if you feel like you had a magic moment and then you listen back to it and you're not bored, you know, like, because you know, we all record our gigs and stuff, and sometimes you just want to, you can't listen, you're like, oh, gotta turn this off. But if you feel like, oh, that was a special gig, and then you listen back to it and you actually want to listen to it, that's probably a good sign.
Totally, yeah, definitely. But I guess like a lot of these things get put out in retrospect as well, don't they? Like I've noticed a lot of Bandcamp Friday releases of like gigs that have happened like way back.
Yeah.
But then that's cool though, because you get the perspective, you get that distance between it. It's like, oh yeah, like this band that doesn't exist anymore, and there's this thing that's popped up. It's like, oh cool, wow, I want to check this out, see what it was like live, you know, like where they were really getting down, and But no, I definitely found that's quite cool. So yes, it's making me think. Yeah, it's like that thing whether to try and record everything and hope maybe there's something in there for, I don't know.
And you hit on something important when you were asking the question, in that, like, you know, now we have access to cheaper technology that's really pretty good. So it's behooves everybody to learn as much as they can about recording, capturing good sounds, the different kinds of microphones and how they all work, how to treat your space for sound, you know, the basics of just like EQ and compression and reverb. If you just have a very basic understanding of those things, you have the tools to make your own records, which won't cost you very much money at all. And so that's another interesting development, you know, in the world.
Definitely, yeah. Because that seems a lot more attractive now, especially after, you know, like, the price of going to a studio is astronomical, you know. It's like, and obviously like the musician fees, or you know, the fact that you want to pay your friends to play the music as well is like.
Exactly. That's one of the biggest expenses of making a record, is making sure you pay the people you play with appropriately. And yeah, I mean, it's a dichotomy, because like, I think it's becoming less and less common. No, I don't think it's becoming less and less common. I just think that there's such a profusion of sort of homegrown records that contain great music, but they don't sound great. You know, that's become very common. And records that are like really thoughtfully recorded and expertly mixed. That's another big thing. You know, I wonder about my friends who are mix engineers, how they feel about this whole thing, because like, there's no you can't buy yourself an Apollo interface and a Neumann microphone and think that you're going to be able to engineer like a professional. And so, you know, so there is that sort of, there's the pluses and minuses, because I still love to put on good headphones and get lost in just an incredible sounding record, you know?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. But yeah, it's funny, isn't it? Like since in the past few months, because I've done one of those recordings, like those isolated people doing their part from different places on the mic here, and then I went to a studio, like when it's fine to do so. But yeah, and then just hearing the difference in the sound where the bass was recorded is like, oh wow, okay, cool, okay, I get it now.
Yeah.
That's engineers, like they're on it. Like,
Yeah, they're some of the biggest musical geniuses
oh
I've
yeah,
ever met have been engineers, man.
definitely,
Uh,
yeah.
just the acuity they have for listening, is unbelievable.
Yeah, it's incredible, isn't it? And just hearing kind of how each thing's blend as well. It's almost like it's almost like being an arranger, but on a kind of another level as well, I guess, isn't it?
It's a different kind of arranging for sure, yeah, because you have to have like this great imagination to, like, if you ever watch like a video on YouTube or whatever where people go through mix sessions track by track, and you'll be like, oh my god, these acoustic guitars sound like garbage alone, but then when you fold them into the mix, they just have that perfect little frequency range to where you can just like hear the string strumming, and you don't hear the body of the chords because you don't need that in the mix because it's being covered by something else. Like
Yeah.
that sort of imagination that you need to have to know, like, don't worry about like this, we're doing this weird thing where we're going to put the mic right by your fingertips because we're trying to get that immediacy and that whatever. That's just a whole different kind of musical imagination, and it is arranging. It's just instead of sheet music, they use hertz. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
exactly. Yeah. But it's amazing, yeah. And like, been in those situations with like some engineers, they just like try some stuff out like that.
Oh man.
You're hearing things. So like, I've got a friend who's a great engineer. I remember he had like in the studio, there's just like a piano board, like with a string still on. And then he just put a bunch of speakers in a room and just like put it in front of that, so it just excites all the harmonics and the strings and see, just to try that
Whoa,
vibe out.
that's so. There's
Yeah.
this guy. I'm sure you've heard of him, Pete Rendy. He's a great piano player, but he's
Oh
also
yeah.
he was like, involved with Nora Jones early in her when she was blowing up, and he makes tons of records and does mastering and stuff. This dude built a plate reverb that's so big it takes up a whole room in his apartment
Yeah.
that
That's
he
amazing.
that he uses to send his mixes through this real plate reverb. I mean,
Wow.
like that kind of musician. Or who's another one is Cliff Martinez, this guy who he lives out in California. He was the drummer for Red Hot Chili Peppers for their
Oh
first record.
yeah. I remember. Is it the
And
first two records, right?
yeah, and
Right.
he does film scores. He's one of my favorite film composers. He's like a modern day Harry Partch. He builds instruments,
Oh wow.
And he might build a whole apparatus that looks like a piece of modern art, and it's just for one sound, you
Wow.
know. And then he puts the mic all around it to try and find different cool sweet spots and stuff. It's so cool.
Oh
Yeah.
man, that's funny to think that someone who's like that deep into it was in the Red Hot Chili Peppers.
I know.
But I'm still having my mind blown by that. The guy who's So now that you say that, I recognise the name.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh man, I used to love those records. Like the first four Chili Peppers ones.
Yeah.
I
Me
think
too.
maybe that thing is because like no one else I was in school with when I was in high school just like knew about those first four albums. Like
Yeah.
you had to seek them out. So it's mainly for my like cool seeking points. I was trying to get that, but no one found it. Cool, but yeah. So I was just thinking about. So I guess the two main projects you have happening, Big Heart Machine and the quartet. So is the quartet called Little? And
Yeah.
then cool, and that's the name of the first album that you brought out with the quartet, isn't it? Cool. So which came first? Was it the quartet or the big band? Or the...
They both sort of came simultaneously. The rhythm sections that I have tended to work with over the years have been the same people in Little and in Big Heart Machine. And like with everybody else, it just sort of came down to who I was friends with and playing sessions with. And so so Ollie Hirvonen, the guitar player, is one of my best friends, and his sound and the way he's very similar to what's happening with you and I, in that when I met Ollie, we immediately were like, he's from Helsinki and I'm from Chicago, but we had the same points of reference for everything. We sort of had very similar childhoods and developments, and so I knew that he just got where I was coming from.
Cool. Yeah.
And then, as I got to know him, his sound and his approach to the guitar sort of just incidentally became a fundamental part of the music I write. And the same is true for all the other people I put with. Marty Kenny, bass player, a variety of different drummers, Nathan Elman Bell, Jay Sawyer, Stephen Kramer, and then so the rhythm sections, I sort of think of the reason the names are sort of Big Heart Machine and Little is because that's how I think about them. They're just two iterations of my musical world, and one of them's big and one of them's small.
Cool.
So but the Big Heart Machine record came first, because I knew I had to get that one done, because the music, I had done all the music sort of simultaneously for those two records, but I just sort of knew that if I didn't take the plunge and make that Big Heart Machine record while the music was fresh, and we had a string of different gigs over the course of a couple of years to where people had gotten familiar with the music, and I was like, if I don't do this now, it might never get done. So I did that one first. But
amazing.
And now I'm just sort of hoping, my goal with everything I do is just like to keep those things going. I really believe in the longevity of bands. I think that is sort of behind a lot of the music that I like. As a fan, I like going on journeys with bands. I like seeing how they grow and develop and change and stuff. So in my dreams, Big Heart Machine is still going in 20 years and 30 years, and so I'm sort of orienting the rest of my career around how can I make that happen,
Cool. Yeah. Because I remember hearing about that band like a good few years ago. Because how did I hear about it? Because I know Simon German.
Oh, you know Simon?
Yeah. So when he was in London, I took an electric bass lesson with him. It was like,
oh, cool.
Yeah, he's like
Simon
one of my favorites. Yeah, he's insane. Bass.
He's the best bass and guitar, and as a person, you'd be hard pressed to find more of a gentleman. I really love Simon. Yeah, and he played in early iterations of Big Heart Machine, but it just like never, you know how it is. It never worked out to get him on a record, but maybe one day it will.
Yeah.
And he also played with Little early on too.
All right, cool.
Yeah, Simon, and we also used to practice together a lot, me and Simon. I'd go over to his apartment when he lived in Queens, and just like play over drones or practice tunes or rhythmic things. Like it was one of those things. What are you working on? What are you working on? So
amazing.
yeah, and it's been like that too with Ollie and Marty and various people, where we just sort of like became a de facto band because we just shed together a lot, played a lot of sessions, and so
Oh, cool. Yeah. But no, I mean, those guys are amazing sound, especially like Ollie, like hearing the Jag thing, or the Jazz Master. I can never tell the difference
The
between those
jazz
guitars.
master.
Yeah.
Ollie's just a genius. You know, he's like so good at guitar, and I almost feel like I'm encouraged to write complicated shit because he just eats it for breakfast. I've never written anything that was at all challenging for him, and I always think it's going to be crazy, and then he gets to it and it's no problem.
Amazing.
So, you know, um, but yeah, so sometimes I find myself being like, all right, I got to chill out because I'm just writing this crazily complicated stuff, and you know there is no limit, I think, to what these dudes can do. So
Amazing, yeah. But would you, yeah, because in developing those bands, were you using the same compositions for both, or was it kind of a very different set of rules with both groups?
no, yeah, I was using the same compositions. Two of like my most popular big band charts are, one's called Jellycat and one's called Don't Analyze, and both of those are just arrangements of small band tunes that I used to play quartet, quintet, and then I just thought they were both such good tunes that they would work well um, with the big band. But now that I think about it, that was years ago now, and I haven't arranged something for the quartet for big band since. Um, and it's just interesting. I don't know why. Um, I think that like they've both like taken on their own personalities maybe. So yeah.
Amazing, yeah. But I guess yeah. But in terms of having a big band, yeah, that's pretty full on. It's amazing. But in terms of like the composition side of that, were you kind of scoring things like for a big band, like straight onto the chart kind of thing, or were you kind of taking the tune and then expanding it from there? Because I guess there's a lot of colours being explored with some of those pieces. Like,
yeah, I never, basically never. I'm trying to think of an example that would contradict what I'm about to say, but I don't think there is. I don't think I've ever written anything straight into the score. I've known people who are really good working that way, and I like get jealous because it's like it seems so much quicker, you know, like to just have like a fully fledged idea and then just sort of like write it down. Like I used to live with this guy named Scott Ninmer, who's a really great arranger, and I remember like he would take like 2 lines maybe of manuscript notes and then be ready to write the whole thing in a big band chart. And then there's like all these old school guys who I really look up to who would just write the parts. They wouldn't even write a score. They would, you know, back when people were handwriting, it was pretty common for there not even to be a score, which is why if people lost their parts, it was so devastating because people were in such a rush to write, to have enough material, especially if you're like in a territory band or a band that is playing a lot of like sort of longer sets or multiple nights in a row where you need a lot of material. They'd just be so desperate. They'd be writing, you know, the first alto part and then the second alto part and then the tenor one part, and they'd just be able to do that. It's unbelievable to me because I tend to be the opposite of that. I take a lot of notes, many pages of manuscript paper, trying to figure out like what the piece is going to be. I call that pre-composition, and I actually make all my students do that because I just sort of feel fairly certain that you shouldn't stop searching for ideas when you get a good idea. You should just sort of like take note of that idea, but then also see where it might lead. Because your first idea may not be your best idea. It may be your best idea, and then in that case, it doesn't hurt to continue to explore. And if you end up throwing away all this material and going back to your first idea, you didn't lose anything. But if you just have a good idea and then start writing, you could be missing out on even better ideas, So I usually tend to for myself and for my students, I'm like, exhaust every possible idea. Once you've gotten to the point where you can't think up another thing, then you start writing. And then the process of writing becomes really quick and easy because you've got all these ideas laid out, and you can just sort of like, it's like a puzzle. Okay, maybe I'll take this idea and put it first, and then I see how it could turn into a form, and this might be something that Charlotte Greve would love to blow over, because you start to like sort of put it all together based on the people and what material you have in front of you. The composing becomes a process of choice. You're just choosing the ideas that you want to use, rather than a process of conjuring up music from nowhere, which to me is like intimidating and relies too much on chance. And especially when you get in situations where you have deadlines and commissions and stuff, you can't rely on chance,
No, exactly, yeah. Because
So-
I mean, yeah, it's not until like in the last few years I've been kind of trying to do that thing of like preparing something first and then expanding on it. It's like, I don't know, just reminds you of being, because in college, like, I don't know, because it was on one of the jazz course, so there's no like formal composing kind of thing. No one ever said like, jot these ideas down that way, But it's funny because I was like looking through, because I got into buying those, those like books that Zorn put out, Arcana.
Oh yeah,
The
yeah.
essay ones. Yeah, but just like so much stuff in that where they, like a lot of the musicians mention that, and it's like, oh yeah, God, that totally makes sense. And then hearing like Hollenbeck's got a great one. Where he does dissects like one of the Claudia Quintet scores.
Oh, in one of the Arcana books?
Yeah. It's like
I haven't read that, but like Hollenbeck is like sort of the reference point for where I got this sort of outlook on things, like
right, okay, yeah.
Because his whole idea is that he's very rigorous about like the sort of ethics of composing, and this should just never left me hearing him talk. I went to a masterclass somewhere where he talked about this, and he was like, when you're writing, you're alone in a room, and your decision making you're the only person who's privy to your decision making. And so it's a perfect chance to exercise your ethics, because if you have an idea and there's any number of things, like if you have an idea and that it sounds like another thing that you've already heard, you could just say to yourself, nobody will notice, and sort of take the expedient route and just hope that nobody notices that you sort of did some light plagiarism,
Yeah.
or any number of things, So his whole thing is like approaching the process with creativity and not worrying so much about how the final product sounds, but more letting the final product be a representation of the creative process, and more often than not, it's going to sound great. it'll just sound different. It'll be less familiar sounding. But
Definitely, yeah.
so yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because that's like had a big influence on me. Like uh, I have a really hard time accepting things I've written that I know are not original. You know, I just have to throw those things out, because you know, it's going to be different from person to person. I don't think there's anything wrong with uh, rehashing old ideas if that's meaningful to you in that moment. But for me, it's like, it's just hard. It doesn't excite me. It makes me sort of feel like, what's even the point?
Yeah.
You know, like this, I've heard this before. And unfortunately, you know, like human beings, we're not, you know, how do I phrase this? If you just are going to rely on your ears or what you play to become the music that you write, it's probably not going to be original, because all we have is a repository of the things we've heard. And maybe that's not your goal as a composer, to be original, and that's cool. Then you're dealing with sort of a different set of parameters. But I think my goal is to be, for a variety of reasons, like to honor the people who have, the musicians who have like really impacted my life and influenced me, and sort of given me this like profound creativity that, like, you know, that permeates everything in my life. I want to sort of continue that tradition, you know, which is doing something different, you know, and it's a lot harder than it sounds to do something different, you know.
That's for sure, man. Yeah, definitely. It's like, I wonder with, yeah, I don't know, just hearing the evolution of music is kind of like, it's sped up towards the end of the 20th century. And then it's like, yeah, the
Yeah,
ways
I
things have
also,
exploded, I find it crazy. It's like how,
yeah,
like,
it
I don't know
definitely
if
hit.
things are slowing down or whether it's like they're speeding up towards another way where like it's branching off in all these different ways, you know? Yeah.
Who can say, man? Who knows? I mean, another person who had a big influence on me in this regard is Jacob Garczyk, the trombone player. He put out a record this year called Clear Line, and this record has, actually all of his records have no rhythm section.
Oh,
Jacob
wow.
Garczyk. And a big part of the reason in making that choice is because it's going to force you as a composer to make different choices, you know. And I had this one interesting conversation with Jacob last year where he was talking about how there's a whole strain in music, of people who make their decisions rather than from a standpoint of incorporating. It's from a standpoint of um, uh, disavowing. It's an anti strain. You know, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do this. Rather than saying, I want to do that, I want to do something, you know, rather than
Right.
saying to yourself, I want to have a band that's like Snarky Puppy,
Yeah.
you know, or as an example, you could say, I'm not going to have rhythm section. I'm never going to have like, imagine writing a piece of music and you say, I'm never going to have any of the instruments play in the staff. They all have to play either above or below in
Wow.
ledger lines. That limitation right there is enough that's going to force you to write something that is, whether or not it turns out sounding pleasant, it will at least be a creative process. And to me, that's more desirable, because, you know, 1 out of every 100 of those might be something really great. And I'd rather take those odds, you know.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah.
So
But yeah, it's that system as well. Like, yeah, because I'm kind of quite into that mathsy thing as well, of how things link up, and just seeing like the natural phenomenons within music, I think is amazing. Yeah.
Yeah,
But it's like,
totally.
coming back to that Hollenbeck essay, like there's one thing, yeah, you mentioned kind of like having this system to finish this piece. Oh no, to compose the piece, I mean. But then there's certain sentences it says like, yeah, from bar 83 to 101, I finished this by following my ear. I just thought it was like amazing. It's kind of,
Yeah.
it's
Well,
like,
you can't be fascistic, like
yeah,
you set these parameters to guide you, but you don't have to follow them fascistically. That's not gonna, you also, the reason that, we have max MSP. We can set any set of parameters and instruct a computer to follow them through coldly. But the reason there is the artist is to have that element of taste,
definitely,
So,
yeah.
it's not that Hollenbeck is he's allowed to break his own rules, because
Yeah, definitely. But I love those moments where it's like, yeah, it's just like a kind of a human against the machine almost, and then kind of, yeah,
yeah,
and how
you're
to
you're a
make those things
filter.
work. Yeah,
You're a filter to yeah. You're a filter.
definitely. And then,
You
yeah,
take
but
you take this. I mean, the like the mystical element of music is what you don't have any way of verbalizing. You don't. There is no. Um, there's no way to codify it, but by giving yourself a set of limitations to adhere to, you're forcing yourself to make creative solutions. You get what I'm saying? So, like, uh, yeah, it's finding the right balance of of uh, of those things. Yeah.
definitely, yeah. But yeah, so it's all kind of exciting. Just music making, I love it. Just those I mean, so many different
Me
processes, it's
me too,
incredible.
man. Me too. And at the end of the day, like it's like what I always say is doing something is better than doing nothing. There's just everybody has the ability to create, and everybody has their own personal ethic and shit. Like, I don't think that the way I do things is better or correct or anything. I just think that we should all be adding to the amount of beauty in the world, because like that's really what it's all about, is just sort of like, we're like, when you really step back and think about why create music, you know like, it's why have we always done this? Why is it such an important fundamental part of humanity? you know it's I don't know, but I mean, it's what I can only know what it's done for me. And
Mm,
it's like, it's adding value to your life by making you learn more about that unnameable, uh, mystical thing that makes life worthwhile. That it's like, it's learning more about yourself, learning more about your fellow man, connecting, having moments where you're not uh, paralyzed by this, like, uh, apocalyptic fear. Like,
yeah.
it just adds, it adds depth to the world, and it's all good. you know the one thing I found is that the older you get, the more lenient you become. Like, when I'm sure you're like this too, like when I was a kid, I would always be like, this record sucks,
Yeah.
this record is bullshit. Now I'm like, damn, they made a record this year, that's really impressive. I want to check it out and see what they're dealing with. And
Yeah,
uh
definitely.
it's so
Yeah. Oh man. But dude, I think that's a good place to to call it, man. Yeah. But thanks so much for
cool,
doing
dude.
it, man. And yeah, legend. Thanks so much.